Nathaniel Hayes never wanted children, or at least that was what people murmured in hushed voices at elite gatherings. He was a man obsessed with success, with no room for anything or anyone that might slow him down. His wife, Serafina Val, was the opposite. A gifted artist with a gentle soul, she saw beauty in the simplest things. But in his world of power and wealth, sentimentality had no place. So when Serafina told him she was pregnant, everything collapsed. He accused her of deception, of trapping him into a life he never wanted. The words he threw at her were like daggers, each one cutting deeper than the last. And in the end, he did the unthinkable. He sent her away with nothing but a single suitcase and a heart full of shattered dreams. That was 5 years ago. Now, a woman unlike the one he cast aside has returned. Strong, self-possessed, and commanding attention with her every step, she is no longer the quiet, fragile Serafina he once knew. At her side walks a bright-eyed child full of life and curiosity. The whispers spread like wildfire. Who is this formidable woman? And more importantly, who is the father of her child? Nathaniel Hayes is a name that commands respect. Born in the small coastal town of Savannah, Georgia, he built an empire from nothing, turning risky investments into gold with a brilliance that stunned Wall Street. By his early 30s, he was already a legend, a financial mastermind who turned failing companies into billion-dollar giants. Money followed, then power, then the fascination of a world obsessed with self-made success stories. It was at an extravagant charity gala in New York where he first saw Serafina. She wasn't like the others, didn't simper, didn't try to impress him. In a deep sapphire dress, she carried herself with an effortless grace. While the room buzzed with meaningless chatter, she surprised him with a simple question, not about stocks or business, but about the causes he truly cared about. It caught him off guard. That night, amidst the glittering skyline and murmured laughter, they found an unexpected connection. She was an artist who painted emotions onto canvas. He was a businessman who turned visions into reality. The world adored their story, the perfect fusion of passion and ambition. Their wedding was nothing short of a spectacle, a grand affair at the Hayes family estate, attended by the city's most powerful figures. The press hailed them as the embodiment of modern romance. Serafina, the creative soul, and Nathaniel, the unstoppable force. Their honeymoon was straight out of a dream. Private yachts, moonlit dinners, whispered promises of a future filled with adventure. But dreams fade, and reality was far less kind. Nathaniel's world moved at an unforgiving pace. He lived on planes and in boardrooms, jumping between New York, London, and Tokyo. Serafina tried to keep up, traveling with him at first, but she quickly became nothing more than an afterthought in his fast-moving life. The long conversations they once cherished dwindled into clipped phone calls, swallowed by Nathaniel's endless responsibilities. When he did come home, he was distracted, preoccupied, and sometimes he simply didn't come back at all. The mansion they lived in was filled with staff who treated her kindly, but Serafina soon realized the bitter truth. She was nothing more than a shadow in her own home. In a world built on wealth and ambition, Serafina had always been little more than an ornament, something beautiful to admire, but never truly valued. Yet, when she discovered she was pregnant, a fragile hope bloomed in her heart. Surely, this would bring them closer. She imagined Nathaniel's expression softening with pride, his hands resting protectively on her growing belly. But when the moment finally came, when she shared the news in what was meant to be a quiet, intimate exchange, his reaction crushed her. His face darkened, his voice cold as ice. He accused her of trying to derail his empire, of trapping him in a life he never wanted. Each word was a blade, cutting deep, sharper than any wound she had ever known. When she tried to reason with him, to remind him of the love they had once shared, he only grew colder. And then came the final blow. During a heated argument, his patience snapped. He told her to leave, unless she was willing to end the pregnancy. The room seemed to spin. She searched his face for any trace of the man she had once loved, but there was none, only indifference. Shaking, devastated, she packed her things. She walked down the grand staircase of the Hayes estate one last time, her vision blurred with tears. The gilded chandeliers, the marble floors, none of it mattered anymore. For her, this was the moment her world crumbled. For Nathaniel, it was nothing more than an inconvenience. She stepped out into the cold night, 2 suitcases in hand, her entire life reduced to what she could carry. The confrontation still echoed in her mind, his cutting words, the resentment in his eyes. A light drizzle began to fall, mixing with the tears on her cheeks. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, trying to steady her breath. A nearby taxi idled at the curb. The driver, sensing her distress, offered a hand with her bags. "Where to?" he asked. Serafina hesitated. The truth was, she had nowhere to go. Her family lived across the country in San Francisco, but going there felt like an admission of total defeat. She wasn't ready to face their sympathy or their disappointment. So in a quiet, trembling voice, she gave the driver the name of an upscale hotel. She needed a place to think, to process what had just happened. That night, she sat alone in the stark white room, staring at the ceiling, her mind a whirlwind of questions. How had things unraveled so quickly? Had she really meant so little to him? Desperation clawed at her chest, and in one last attempt at hope, she called Nathaniel. Straight to voicemail. By morning, she checked her bank account, half expecting him to cut her off entirely. But the funds were still there. Maybe he had simply forgotten, or maybe he considered it hush money. Either way, it didn't change what she had to do next. She couldn't stay in New York, surrounded by memories of humiliation and betrayal. The city had once felt like home, but now every street, every building was a painful reminder of what she had lost. So she disappeared. She traveled north, settling in a quiet coastal town in Rhode Island, one she had once visited during an art retreat. It was small, secluded, far away from the prying eyes of the media and high society. The perfect place to vanish. She rented a modest cottage by the water. It was nothing like the penthouse she had left behind, but it was hers, and for the first time in weeks, she felt something close to peace. At first, adjusting was difficult. She knew no one in this sleepy town, and as her pregnancy progressed, so did her fears. How would she support a child on her own? Even with some savings, the future felt daunting, but she was stronger than she had ever been forced to be. She picked up a paintbrush again. Under a different name, she began selling her work online. Slowly, her vibrant canvases found a small but dedicated audience. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get by. And then, there was Pauline Whitmore. Her elderly neighbor had lived in the town for decades, a warm and kind-hearted widow who saw right through Serafina's quiet struggles. She started dropping by with homemade meals, sharing soft-spoken stories over cups of tea. She noticed Serafina's growing belly, and with a motherly insistence, made sure she wasn't alone in her journey. And so, little by little, Serafina found her footing. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building something new. Something for herself, and something for the child she had chosen, against all odds, to keep. Over cups of herbal tea in Pauline Whitmore's warm, sunlit kitchen, Serafina found something she never expected. Someone who simply listened. She never poured out every painful detail, but bit by bit she let slip the truth. How her marriage had ended the moment her husband rejected their child. Pauline never pried. She only offered quiet wisdom and a reassuring touch on Serafina's hand. "You're stronger than you know, dear," she said one afternoon. "Life doesn't always go the way we plan, but sometimes heartbreak is what shapes us into who we were always meant to be." Serafina wasn't sure she believed that yet, but she held on to one undeniable truth. Her child was worth every tear she had shed. Months later, on a crisp autumn morning, the moment arrived. With Pauline by her side, she brought her baby into the world at a small hospital near the coast. The doctors marveled at her quiet strength, her unwavering composure. And when they finally placed the tiny, perfect infant in her arms, a fierce love surged through her. She named her daughter Lillian Vale, honoring her own family name. No trace of the father who had cast them aside. In that moment, Serafina made a silent vow. She would protect Lillian with everything she had. She would build a future for them, alone, if necessary. No matter how hard, no matter how lonely, she would forge her own path. That first year tested her in ways she never imagined. Lillian needed constant care, leaving Serafina running on little more than sheer willpower. Nights were long, sleepless, filled with the quiet cries of a newborn and the exhaustion of feeding, rocking, comforting. But there was no time to dwell on the past. Nathaniel's betrayal, the life she had left behind, It all blurred into insignificance in the face of her daughter's tiny laughter, her bright eyes discovering the world for the first time. Still, there were quiet moments when doubt crept in. She wondered if Nathaniel ever thought about the life he had walked away from, if he ever questioned the choice he had made. But those thoughts never lingered, because every time she saw Lillian giggle at a flickering candle or stretch her small hands toward the ocean breeze, Serafina was reminded her daughter deserved more than regret and resentment. So she painted. Whenever Lillian napped, Serafina poured her emotions onto the canvas. Loss, love, resilience, they swirled into bold, evocative strokes, telling a story only her heart understood. Pauline, always a steady presence, offered help whenever she could. She watched Lillian while Serafina traveled to nearby towns, displaying her work at small art fairs. Word spread. The raw emotion in her paintings caught people's attention. Slowly, recognition followed. Some art collectors even suspected her identity, recognizing the distinctive style from exhibitions she once held in New York. But she stayed in the shadows, signing only as S. Vale or simply Lillian's mother. She refused to lean on Nathaniel's fortune, touching as little of their joint account as possible. It felt tainted, like a debt she refused to owe. Instead, she scraped by on her art sales, determined to build something that was hers alone. By the time Lillian turned 2, Serafina realized their tiny seaside cottage could no longer contain both a growing child and her expanding studio. She needed space, not just to live, but to truly thrive. That opportunity came in an unexpected way. At a charity auction in Rhode Island, an influential Boston gallery owner, Martin Ashford, stumbled upon one of her paintings. Something about it, the rawness, the depth of feeling, captivated him. He tracked her down, offering her a spot in an upcoming gallery exhibition. It was an incredible opportunity, a leap forward, a chance to step beyond the quiet, hidden life she had built and reclaim the part of herself she had left behind. Nervous but determined, she accepted. The exhibition was a triumph. Critics praised her work for its haunting beauty, its unfiltered honesty. A stirring reflection of the human spirit, one reviewer wrote. Martin, delighted by the response, introduced her to high-profile clients eager for commission pieces. Slowly but surely, her income flourished. The days of counting every dollar, of choosing between groceries and art supplies, were behind her. And through it all, Lillian thrived. Her little girl, full of light and wonder, had no idea how much strength she had given her mother. Serafina had once thought she had lost everything. But as she stood in that bustling gallery, surrounded by admirers of her work, she realized something. She hadn't been broken. She had been reborn. Lillian Vale had inherited her mother's soft nature, her quiet strength. But in her bright, knowing eyes, Serafina sometimes caught a flicker of something else. A sharpness, a spark that reminded her of Nathaniel. Every time she saw that familiar glimmer, a pang shot through her. Part sorrow, part reluctant acceptance. Lillian had a father out there, a man who had never met her, who had chosen ambition over the family they could have been. But Serafina had no time to dwell on what-ifs. She had built a life, one far removed from the world she had once belonged to. Within a few short years, she had become one of New England's most promising artists, her evocative work catching the attention of collectors and critics alike. The modest cottage she had once struggled to afford was now behind her. She had bought a charming home near Boston, complete with a sunlit studio where she painted while Lillian played. Living under her maiden name, Serafina Vale, allowed her to create a new identity, one untouched by the expectations and whispers of high society. No longer was she the woman who had once clung to Nathaniel Hayes's arm at glittering galas. Yet deep down, she knew. Her past had not truly vanished. It lay dormant, a secret waiting for the right moment to resurface. And sooner or later, fate would find a way to pull them back into each other's lives. Only this time, she was no longer the fragile woman he had so easily cast aside. 5 years had passed since Serafina walked away, and in that time, Nathaniel's empire had soared to unimaginable heights. He had orchestrated 2 of the largest mergers in recent history, expanded his ventures into high-stakes real estate in Asia, and secured his place among the financial elite. Business magazines celebrated him as a visionary, a master of the market, a self-made titan, At every keynote speech, every high-profile event, reporters inevitably tried to probe into his personal life. He dodged the questions with polished indifference. Rumors swirled. Some whispered that his wife had left him. Others speculated that he had sent her away. But no confirmed details ever surfaced. His empire was too perfectly controlled, his public image too meticulously curated, to let scandal tarnish his success. Yet beneath the surface, something lingered. Late at night, in his Manhattan penthouse, an expanse of glass and steel perched high above the city, Nathaniel sometimes found himself standing by the window, a glass of whiskey in hand. He never allowed himself to dwell on it for long, but there were moments, fleeting and unbidden, when memories of Serafina drifted into his mind. The warmth of her smile. The way she used to laugh, soft but full of life. The way she had looked at him before everything fell apart. He had never publicly acknowledged her departure. To his closest associates, he offered only a vague explanation. We grew apart. And for a time, that had been enough. Only a handful of insiders in high society had gossiped about Serafina's sudden disappearance, but without a statement, without any concrete proof, the whispers eventually faded. Nathaniel told himself, over and over, that her pregnancy had been a betrayal, that she had trapped him, that she had known exactly what she was doing when she let it happen. The thought of fatherhood, of responsibility beyond his empire, had clashed so violently with his ambitions that he had convinced himself she had sabotaged him. And yet, as the years passed, doubt began to creep in. A quiet, nagging question that surfaced in the rare stillness between his meetings, in the pauses between champagne toasts and ringing applause. What if you were wrong? But he never let the thought linger for long. Instead, he buried himself in more expansion, more investments, more deals. He funneled millions into philanthropy, becoming a patron of the arts, ironically funding up-and-coming painters in silent tribute to the woman he had pushed away. Sometimes at gallery events, he thought he saw her, a glimpse of dark hair, a familiar silhouette in the crowd. But every time, it was someone else. The ache of regret never truly disappeared. Despite all his triumphs, his personal life remained empty. He went through a series of brief, shallow relationships, models, actresses, women who never asked for anything beyond luxury and entertainment. None lasted more than a few months. His penthouse remained untouched by another presence. He refused to share his space, refused to let anyone disrupt the world he had built. Even his parents, once so proud of his success, had begun to notice the guarded, hollow edge in him. Whenever they gently brought up the idea of settling down, of family, of grandchildren, he dismissed the conversation outright. But on one particular evening, as he sat across from Andrew Ashworth, his longtime mentor and one of the most respected investors in the industry, Nathaniel found him facing something he couldn't easily ignore. Over an expensive bottle of red wine, Andrew leaned back, studying him with the sharp gaze of a man who had seen empires rise and fall. "You've built an empire, Nathaniel," he said, swirling his glass. "But tell me something. What exactly do you have to come home to?" The question lingered. For the first time in years, Nathaniel had no immediate answer. Over an expensive bottle of red wine, Andrew Ashworth leaned back in his chair, studying Nathaniel with the measured gaze of a man who had seen fortunes rise and fall. "Men like us thrive on success," he mused. "But we also need meaning beyond the deals, Nathaniel. Otherwise, what's left?" Nathaniel bristled at the comment. He had everything: wealth, power, influence. Why wouldn't he be satisfied? Yet Ashworth's words lingered, an irritation that refused to fade. Later that night, as he walked toward his car, he caught sight of a young mother cradling a toddler on the sidewalk. The child's laughter rang out, bouncing off the towering buildings of Manhattan. For a brief, disorienting moment, something tightened in his chest. A flicker of a thought. Was there a child, his child, out there somewhere? A life unfolding without him? But just as quickly as the thought surfaced, he dismissed it. Sentimentality was a dangerous indulgence. Serafina had her path, I had mine, and he was determined not to let shadows from the past derail the empire he had built. But some destinies refused to stay buried. The reckoning Nathaniel Hayes had unknowingly evaded for years was now drawing near, far closer than he could ever suspect. On a bright afternoon in Boston, Serafina Vale was in the final stages of preparing for her biggest professional breakthrough yet, a highly anticipated collaborative art exhibition curated by Martin Ashford's prestigious gallery. Critics were already buzzing, calling it a must-see event for serious collectors. And yet, even as she finalized details, another unexpected opportunity landed in her lap. An email arrived from the Hannah Frost Foundation, a well-regarded nonprofit that funded women's shelters and empowerment programs. They wanted to purchase several of her paintings for an upcoming fundraiser. It was a cause close to her heart. How could she say no? Lillian, now a spirited 5-year-old with endless curiosity, twirled around the sunlit studio, her tiny hands smudged with safe, washable paint as she experimented with colors on a small easel. Serafina paused mid-task, watching her daughter's face light up with joy, a joy that reminded her of the happiness she once knew. Before everything fell apart. Then her phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, a Manhattan area code. Hesitant, she answered. "Miss Vale? This is Christine Holden, Assistant Director of the Hannah Frost Foundation." Serafina listened as Christine explained, her voice full of enthusiasm. The foundation's primary benefactor, a high-profile billionaire, had offered to host an exclusive charity gala in Manhattan. As part of the event, curated artwork, including Serafina's, would be auctioned off. "Your work aligns so beautifully with our mission," Christine gushed. "We'd love for you to attend in person. We want the world to see the artists behind these powerful pieces." Serafina's fingers tightened around the phone. Manhattan, the city where she had once been Mrs. Nathaniel Hayes. She had spent 5 years carving out a life where she was just Serafina Vale. Artist, mother, survivor. A return to New York meant stepping dangerously close to the past she had fought to leave behind. But Christine's passion was infectious. The foundation stood for everything Serafina now believed in. Women reclaiming their strength, building something from the ruins of what had broken them. How could she turn away from that? After a long pause, she agreed, but with conditions. "I'll attend if the foundation arranges my accommodations and if my personal details are kept confidential." Christine assured her that every precaution would be taken. Serafina hung up, exhaling slowly. This wasn't just a trip, it was a test. Could she walk through that city, the city of her old life, without being swallowed by it? Could she stand in the same glittering ballrooms where Nathaniel once reigned and feel nothing? She didn't have those answers yet. But she had a month to prepare. Lillian, completely unaware of the weight behind this decision, squealed in excitement at the news. "We're going to Mommy's old city?" Serafina forced a smile. "Yes, sweetheart. Think of it as an adventure." They would visit the museums, the city lights, maybe even Central Park. And if fate decided to throw Nathaniel into her path, well, let it. She wasn't the same woman he had once cast aside. And this time, she wasn't coming alone. Serafina was no longer the timid wife she had once been. She was an artist, a mother, a survivor. This time, she was returning to Manhattan on her own terms. To ensure everything ran smoothly during her absence, Martin Ashford had agreed to manage her Boston commitments while she was away. And thankfully, Pauline Whitmore, her ever-loyal neighbor from Rhode Island, had offered to join them for the first few days in New York, partly for moral support, partly to keep Lillian entertained if Serafina got too busy. That evening, after tucking Lillian into bed, Serafina sat by the window of her home studio, gazing out at the city lights in the distance. A familiar weight settled in her chest, a mixture of anticipation and unease. Reaching for a small wooden box, she traced her fingers over the lid before opening it. Inside, nestled among a few old mementos, lay a wedding ring, a relic of another life. She hadn't worn it in years, yet she had never quite let it go. As she turned the cool metal between her fingers, her mind drifted to the last time she had seen Nathaniel Hayes. 5 years. A long time. She didn't need his approval anymore. She had built a life without him, raised a child he had never met. And yet, the idea of stepping back into his world, into the city that still carried echoes of their past, sent a quiet shiver through her. With a steady breath, she pushed the thoughts aside. If fate intended for them to cross paths again, so be it. But this time she would not be the one to run. The Manhattan skyline glittered like a sea of stars as their train glided over the final stretch of tracks. Seated by the window, Lillian pressed her tiny hands against the glass, eyes wide with wonder. "It's so big," she gasped. Serafina smiled softly, running a hand through her daughter's dark curls. "Yes, it is. I used to live here." Lillian's curiosity sparked instantly. "Did you like it? Did Grandma and Grandpa visit you here?" Serafina answered as much as she could, weaving around the painful parts she wasn't ready to share. Pauline, dozing in the seat beside them, had insisted on accompanying them for at least the first week. "Just to make sure you don't lose your mind, dear," she had joked before boarding. As they stepped off the train at Penn Station, they were met with the warm smile of Christine Holden, the assistant director of the Hannah Frost Foundation. "Welcome to New York," Christine beamed, ushering them toward a waiting car. She had arranged a comfortable suite for them at a family-friendly hotel, ensuring Serafina had everything she needed for the upcoming gala. Over the next few days, Serafina's schedule became a whirlwind of planning sessions and art preparations. Mornings were spent at the Foundation's Midtown office, reviewing the event's floor plan and discussing the artwork curation. Afternoons, however, belonged to Lillian. Together, they explored the city, navigating the neon chaos of Times Square, taking a ferry ride past the Statue of Liberty, and strolling through the vast halls of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Each time Lillian let out a delighted giggle, Serafina felt the tension in her chest loosen, if only for a moment. But even in the midst of these joyful moments, an underlying unease lingered. A quiet awareness that the past was closer than she realized. One afternoon, Pauline took Lillian to Central Park, giving Serafina a rare moment to focus. She stood in a sleek, glass-walled boardroom at the Foundation, running through her short speech while Christine offered pointers. Despite her years of independence, standing in Manhattan, preparing to speak in a space filled with power and influence, made something in her pulse quicken. This was more than just an art exhibition. This was proof that she had made it, that she could stand in the city of her past and not be swallowed whole. During a short break, Christine excused herself to take a call in the corridor. Serafina, half listening, shuffled through her note cards. When Christine returned, there was a shift in her expression. "Small scheduling update," she said with an apologetic smile. "Our primary sponsor has requested a private preview of the exhibit tomorrow evening at the gallery. He specifically asked if you'd be available to discuss your work." Serafina frowned. "Is that normal? Do sponsors usually request private viewings?" Christine nodded. "He's known for wanting personal insight from the artists before major events. It's how he decides which pieces to bid on during the auction." Serafina forced a neutral expression, but unease prickled at the back of her mind. There were many powerful benefactors in Manhattan, and yet, something about this request felt eerily personal. She swallowed the thought and gave a measured nod. "Fine, I'll be there." But deep inside, an old instinct whispered a warning. The past had a way of creeping back when you least expected it. And tomorrow night, she might just find out how close it really was. "It's nothing unusual," Christine reassured her. "The sponsor likes to personally preview the artwork before major events. It helps him prepare his remarks and align with the cause. He's quite thorough." Serafina forced a smile. "Of course, just let me know the time and place. I'll be there." But inside, unease churned in her stomach. A powerful, anonymous backer requesting a private meeting? It felt too familiar, too much like a ghost she wasn't ready to face. And yet, she couldn't refuse. This sponsor had the influence to raise a fortune for the Hannah Frost Foundation. Backing out now could damage not just her reputation, but the very cause she had come here to support. That night, after tucking Lillian into bed at the hotel, Serafina paced the living room, her thoughts racing. Pauline, watching from the couch, finally broke the silence. "You're worried it's him." Serafina stopped, her back stiffening. Then in a quiet voice she admitted, "What if it is?" Pauline's expression softened. "Then you show him the woman you've become." She reached over, squeezing Serafina's hand. "You don't need his approval. You don't need anything from him. The only thing that matters is that you survived and you thrived." Serafina swallowed hard, willing back the emotion that burned behind her eyes. 5 years ago, Nathaniel Hayes had cast her aside, pregnant and alone. Tomorrow, she would stand in the heart of his city, showcasing the life she had built without him. She squared her shoulders, steadying herself. No matter what awaited her, she would face it head-on. The next evening, Serafina arrived at the ballroom of a prestigious Manhattan hotel, the venue reserved for the private preview. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the glittering skyline, while staff hurried to arrange tables draped in crisp white linens. Christine stood by the entrance, clipboard in hand, shifting on her heels with nervous energy. Serafina smoothed the fabric of her black dress, sleek, sophisticated, and nothing like the soft, romantic gowns she had once worn at Nathaniel's side. Her heart pounded as she did a final check of her artwork. The gallery's warm lighting bathed her paintings in a soft glow, revealing the journey woven into each brushstroke, chaos and heartbreak giving way to light and resilience. Christine gently touched her arm. He should be arriving any minute. Serafina inhaled slowly. She wasn't that girl anymore, the one who had wilted beneath Nathaniel's indifference. Whatever happens, I am stronger now. A cluster of bodyguards entered first, their sharp eyes scanning the room. And then he stepped inside, Nathaniel Hayes. Every bit the powerful, commanding figure she remembered, tall, dressed in impeccable tailoring, his hair neatly combed back. But there was something different. The sharpness of his features remained, but the arrogance in his gaze had softened. The confidence was still there, yet edged with a weariness she hadn't seen before. His eyes swept the room, and then they landed on her. Recognition struck like a lightning bolt. His body went rigid, his expression freezing in place, as if the air had been knocked from his lungs. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Christine, oblivious to the storm unfolding between them, beamed. "Mr. Hayes, this is Serafina Vale, our featured artist. She'll be guiding you through her collection." She paused, finally noticing the tension in the air. Nathaniel stood motionless, his eyes locked on Serafina, his lips slightly parted, as if struggling for words. Serafina's pulse thundered in her ears, but she held herself with perfect composure. With a polite nod, she murmured, "Mr. Hayes." A tense silence stretched between them. Christine glanced between the two, frowning slightly at the unspoken friction. Then Nathaniel cleared his throat, his voice rougher than usual. "Miss Vale," he said, the words stiff, strained. "I've been looking forward to seeing your work." Christine, still sensing something off, excused herself to check on the event preparations. And then they were alone. Serafina led him through the exhibit, her voice steady and professional as she explained each piece. She spoke about her technique, the inspiration behind the collection, the emotional depth of the colors, all without ever acknowledging the truth behind them. All while Nathaniel struggled to focus. His gaze kept shifting, from the paintings to her, then back again. Each careful explanation, each measured tone of her voice seemed to rattle him further. Finally, they arrived at one particular piece, a painting titled Rising Dawn. The painting stood at the center of the gallery, bathed in soft light, a lone figure cradling a child against a stark horizon. The background swirled with turmoil, shadows of hardship blending into streaks of hope. Serafina's chest tightened, but she refused to let it show. Keeping her voice even, she said, "This piece marks a turning point in my life." Nathaniel stood beside her, staring at the painting as though it might shatter under his gaze. His hand drifted to his jaw, fingers trembling slightly, a rare crack in his otherwise composed exterior. "You," he started, then hesitated, voice rough. "I heard rumors that you left the city, that you were." He swallowed. "Pregnant." Serafina met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "Yes." She let the word hang between them, letting him absorb it before she continued, her tone blunt and unapologetic. "You made it clear you didn't want a child, so I left." Nathaniel flinched. The weight of those words pressed against him, unraveling something he had buried long ago. His expression darkened, not with anger but something rawer, something he had never allowed himself to feel. "Did you?" He exhaled sharply as if afraid to ask. "Did you keep it?" The uncertainty in his voice cut deeper than any of his past accusations. It took Serafina a moment to realize he had never known. He hadn't allowed himself to ask before, had convinced himself he didn't care. Now, standing before her, he looked like a man on the verge of collapse. She gave a single, steady nod. "She's 5 years old now." Nathaniel's breath hitched. He took a half step back, as if the world had tilted beneath him. For a man who had conquered industries, orchestrated billion-dollar deals, and dominated boardrooms, nothing had prepared him for this moment. A child. His child. For 5 years, she had existed somewhere in the world without him. His mouth opened, but no words came. Serafina didn't flinch under his stunned silence. She had spent years bracing for this confrontation, imagining every possible scenario. This moment was inevitable, and neither of them would leave it unscathed. The ballroom, grand and expansive, suddenly felt suffocating, shrinking around them, reducing their world to a single, undeniable truth. Nathaniel Hayes had a daughter he had never acknowledged. She saw the war of emotions on his face: shock, regret, fear. Memories surged through her. The night he had turned his back on her, his harsh words echoing in the corridors of his penthouse. For a moment, the pain threatened to swallow her whole. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She had survived. Nathaniel finally found his voice, though it was hoarse, uncertain. "Our daughter, how is she?" His gaze flickered across Serafina's face, searching for answers. Does she know about me?" Serafina exhaled, steadying herself. "Her name is Lillian," she said. "She's healthy, she's happy, she's bright." A pause. "She knows she has a father, but I never gave her false hope. You made it clear you didn't want us, so I didn't let her wait for someone who would never come." Nathaniel winced. The quiet rebuke landed harder than any accusation ever could. For the first time in years, he didn't have a response. "I made mistakes," he admitted, barely above a whisper. Before he could say more, Christine's footsteps echoed behind them, breaking the fragile moment. "Mr. Hayes?" she called, glancing between them. "The first guests are arriving." Nathaniel straightened, masking whatever turmoil still churned beneath his sharp suit and carefully controlled posture. But panic flickered in his eyes. He turned back to Serafina, voice urgent. "Please, can we talk in private later?" She hesitated. She should have walked away. Should have held on to the anger, the years of silence, the memory of the night he had sent her away with nothing. But standing in front of him now, he didn't look like the same man who had once dismissed her so easily. For the first time, he looked undone. Against her better judgment, she gave a single nod. After the preview, Christine led the first wave of philanthropic elites into the ballroom, their conversations a mix of polite laughter and murmured intrigue. Nathaniel straightened, slipping effortlessly into his sponsor persona, offering polished greetings, shaking hands with practiced ease. Serafina, too, resumed her role. She spoke with donors, discussing the emotional depth of her work. But beneath the poised professionalism, her mind churned with the weight of the revelation. Nathaniel was the unseen benefactor behind this event, and despite the crowd, despite the lavish setting, he never strayed far from her side. Their gazes met across the room more than once, each time sending a surge of something unsettled through her chest. A storm had begun to brew, and before the night was over, it would demand to be reckoned with. Serafina had always poured her emotions into her paintings. Tonight, more than ever, she realized that some things were worth keeping off the canvas. She had spent the evening navigating polite conversations, carefully maintaining her composure as donors and patrons admired her work. But by the time the last guest departed, her head throbbed from the effort. Christine approached with an apologetic smile. "I know it was a long night. Final instructions for the gala will be sent tomorrow." Serafina barely heard her, because Nathaniel was still there, standing near the ballroom's exit, lingering, waiting. She should have walked away, should have left him to wrestle with his own demons. But something inside her refused to leave this unfinished. They found a quiet corridor just outside the ballroom, where the soft hum of the city beyond was the only sound. A dim light flickered overhead, casting long shadows against the walls. Nathaniel's voice was low, almost hesitant. "Where are you staying?" He swallowed. "I'd like to see Lillian." There it was, the first time he had spoken her name. Serafina's heart clenched, but her instincts sharpened. "You don't get to just swoop in now because you've had some moral epiphany." Her voice was calm, but there was steel behind it. "Do you even remember the last thing you said to me before I walked out?" Nathaniel flinched. "You made me feel worthless, Nathaniel, like a burden, and I survived that. But Amelia deserves stability, not half measures. I need to be sure you won't hurt her the way you hurt me." Pain flickered across his face, raw and unguarded. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. I was terrified, he admitted. I convinced myself that having a child would destroy everything I built. It was selfish, it was wrong. But I can't change the past. I can only ask if you'll let me be part of her life now. Silence filled the space between them. 5 years of unspoken words, of broken trust and lingering scars. Serafina finally exhaled, relenting slightly. We're at the Gardenia Suites. She's with a friend, Pauline. If you want to have this conversation, meet me at the cafe next door tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock. Nathaniel's shoulders dropped in relief. Thank you. His voice was barely a whisper. For a second, he stepped forward, as if some instinctive part of him wanted to close the space between them. But Serafina took a step back. Then she turned and walked away, her heart a tangled mess of emotions she refused to name. Behind her, Nathaniel remained still, watching her disappear down the corridor, like a ghost slipping through time. They both knew there were no illusions left. Only accountability, and a 5-year-old child caught in the space between them. Morning sunlight filtered through the windows of Lavon Rose, the quaint little cafe beside the Gardenia Suites. The soft murmur of conversation and the scent of fresh espresso filled the air. Serafina arrived just before 9, ordering a latte and claiming a table tucked near the back. She had left Lillian with Pauline, offering only a simple explanation. I have a meeting with someone from my past. At 9:05, Nathaniel entered. He scanned the cafe until his eyes landed on her, then approached with careful steps. He wore a perfectly pressed suit, polished, composed, in control. But here, in the relaxed setting, it felt strangely out of place. Serafina motioned for him to sit. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She sipped her coffee, masking the storm inside her, while he sat stiffly across from her, hands clenched. Finally, he broke the silence. Thank you for meeting me. She offered the smallest nod. Let's get to the point, Nathaniel. Her voice was steady, measured. Lillian is my priority. I won't allow anything or anyone that could disrupt her sense of security. Nathaniel swallowed hard. I understand. His hands fidgeted with a sugar packet, a crack in his usual impenetrable demeanor. I want to be in her life, he said. I know I don't deserve an easy path to that, but I'm asking you to let me try. Serafina studied him, searching for sincerity. Why now? She asked. Because you saw me at the gala? Because you couldn't handle the guilt of realizing you actually have a child? Nathaniel's jaw tightened. It's not just guilt. His voice was firm. I've had regrets for a long time. Serafina arched a brow. He sighed, running a hand over his face. I know I was cruel. I was selfish. I told myself that your pregnancy was a betrayal, that it would derail everything I had worked for. Nathaniel exhaled sharply, his voice strained with something almost like regret. I see now how warped that thinking was. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out something small and worn from years of handling. A photo. Serafina's breath hitched the moment she saw it. It was a snapshot from their honeymoon, her arms wrapped around his neck, both of them smiling in careless, unguarded happiness. A moment frozen in time before everything had unraveled. Her throat tightened. She had forgotten that version of herself, the one who had once believed in forever. Nathaniel studied the picture for a long moment before speaking again, his voice rough. I've kept this for years. I look at it sometimes, wondering if we could have built a real family, if I hadn't pushed you away. Serafina forced herself to study. She would not let old wounds reopen. She would not let memories dictate her choices now. If you truly want to be in Lillian's life, you'll have to prove yourself, she said firmly. That means consistency. You don't get to waltz in and out whenever it suits you. She's a child, not a business acquisition. Nathaniel nodded, his gaze dropping to the table. I know. He hesitated before adding, I've already started stepping back from my company, delegating more to my executive team. Fredman and Ashworth can function without me controlling everything. I want to be present for her. Serafina watched him closely, looking for cracks in his polished resolve. We start slowly, she said. Supervised visits, public places. You'll meet her as a family friend for now. I need to see how she responds to you and how reliable you are. If that works, we'll figure out the rest. A flicker of relief crossed Nathaniel's face. Thank you. His voice was quiet, but the weight of it was heavy. I appreciate any chance you give me. Serafina felt her eyes sting but refused to let the emotion show. "This is for Lillian," she warned. "Don't mistake it for forgiveness. That may never come." Nathaniel swallowed, accepting the terms without protest. "I understand." They settled on a plan. 2 days from now, a children's play cafe near the hotel. Serafina would introduce him as an old friend. If Lillian was comfortable, they might share lunch. No promises beyond that. As they parted ways outside Levon Rose, Serafina realized her hands were trembling. Nathaniel remained standing on the sidewalk, watching her go with a haunted expression. Years ago, such a look from him would have melted her resolve. But not anymore. Now, the only thing that mattered was Lillian's happiness. For better or worse, they had begun a new chapter, one that could either heal old wounds or tear them further apart. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of nerves and preparation. Serafina wrestled with conflicting emotions, fear, doubt, and the smallest flicker of hope she refused to name. Pauline, ever the voice of reason, offered reassurance. "You control the pace, dear," she reminded Serafina. "As long as Lillian feels safe, that's what matters." Lillian, oblivious to the weight of what was coming, bounced with excitement when her mother told her they'd be meeting a special friend for lunch. She had no idea how much her life was about to change. The Cozy Castle Play Cafe was bright and bustling, filled with families, laughter, and the scent of warm pastries. Serafina guided Lillian through the entrance, past a group of children stacking foam blocks into wobbly towers. Pauline trailed behind, watching from a discreet distance, ready to step in if needed. And then, there he was. Nathaniel waited near a corner table, looking oddly out of place in his tailored suit. A small plastic princess crown sat in his hands, an employee's playful joke that he hadn't known what to do with. Serafina could see the tension in his posture, the way his fingers curled slightly around the flimsy toy. She inhaled deeply, forcing herself to smile lightly. "Lillian," she said gently, stopping a few steps away. "This is Mr. Nathaniel. He's an old friend of Mommy's." Nathaniel's eyes flickered with emotion at the introduction, but he quickly composed himself. Lillian tilted her head, studying him with wide, curious eyes. Then her gaze dropped to the princess crown in his hands. "Do you like princess crowns, Mr. Nathaniel?" she asked, utterly serious. A ghost of a smile tugged at his lips. "I'm more of a business suit guy," he admitted. Then, after a pause, he turned the tiara over in his hands. "But for today?" He carefully placed it on his head, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "I think I can make an exception." Lillian giggled, stepping forward. And just like that, the past had collided with the present, and the future was waiting to be rewritten. Nathaniel bent down awkwardly, letting Lillian adjust the plastic princess crown on his head. She took her task seriously, tilting it just right before stepping back with satisfaction. "You look like a king," she declared. Serafina's breath caught. It was effortless, how easily Lillian accepted him, if only she knew. They settled at a table in the children's section, ordering kid-friendly snacks. Lillian chattered happily, munching on apple slices and peanut butter sandwiches, while Nathaniel asked about her favorite colors, games, and what she liked to draw. She told him everything, about her paintings with Mommy, her stuffed bunny buttons, and her best friend back home. Nathaniel listened intently, nodding at all the right moments, his gaze occasionally flickering to Serafina. Then, a staff member announced story time, and Lillian bolted from her seat, dashing toward the circle of children. Nathaniel watched her go, awe flickering in his expression. He leaned in slightly, voice low. "She's incredible." Serafina's heart clenched. "Thank you for raising her." Her fingers tightened around her coffee cup. "She's her own little person," she said carefully. "I just gave her a safe place." She kept her tone neutral, but emotion lingered beneath the words. When Lillian returned from story time, she proudly held up a paper crown she had decorated with bright markers and glitter. She plopped down beside Nathaniel and immediately compared it to the plastic one on his head. "Yours is much better," he said, voice softer than she had ever heard it. And then, without hesitation, he swapped them. Serafina watched in silence, her emotions tangled. Nathaniel wasn't forcing anything. He wasn't making grand claims or pushing his way into a role he had once rejected. He was just there, taking in every moment. And Lillian, in the way only children can, accepted him without question. After an hour, Serafina decided it was enough for one day. As they gathered their things, Lillian turned to Nathaniel. "Are you going to see us again?" Nathaniel's gaze flickered to Serafina. He didn't answer, waiting for permission. She hesitated, then gave a small nod. "We take this one step at a time." He crouched to Lillian's level, giving her a small wave. "I'd love to see you again, if your mom says it's okay." Lillian beamed. No grand goodbyes, no emotional farewells. Just a simple hug from a little girl who had no idea how much this moment meant. As they stepped outside, Pauline, who had been watching from a respectful distance, gave Serafina a subtle thumbs up. Serafina let out a shaky exhale, unsure whether to feel relieved or terrified. She glanced over her shoulder. Nathaniel still stood by the door, holding the paper crown in his hands, watching them leave. Though it had been only one meeting, it felt monumental. For the first time, he had glimpsed the child who had only existed in the margins of his regret. And as Serafina walked away, she wondered, could letting him in heal more than just a father-daughter rift? Could it finally bring her some measure of peace? The next 48 hours were a storm of emotions. Nathaniel texted Serafina daily, checking on Lillian, thanking her for the chance to spend even an hour with her. His messages carried a humility she had never seen before. Serafina remained cautious. She responded politely, but kept her distance, avoiding anything too personal. Still, the anger she had clung to for so long was beginning to thaw. She wasn't ready to trust him, but for the first time she wondered if maybe, just maybe, he really did want to be a father. Meanwhile, the city buzzed with anticipation for the upcoming Hannah Frost Foundation Gala. Exclusive invitations had been sent to Manhattan's elite, promising a night of glamour, philanthropy, and fine art. To her surprise, Serafina had become one of the evening's biggest draws. The mysterious artist with a powerful story, known for her evocative paintings, but whose personal life remained a mystery. She tried to focus on this professional milestone, but the reality was clear. Her personal life was now inescapable. And then, one afternoon, Nathaniel made a request. A meeting. Not with Lillian this time, just the two of them. "Lunch?" he suggested. "I think we should talk about how to move forward." Serafina agreed to meet him, but on her terms. A public place, no expectations, no illusions. They chose an upscale bistro near Central Park, neutral ground for a discussion that could reshape the fragile balance between them. When she arrived, Nathaniel was already there. Seated at a corner table, he tapped his phone absently, his usual air of effortless control undercut by a nervous tension. The moment he spotted her, he stood, pulling out her chair. "Thank you for coming." She sat, skimming the menu. "Let's talk about Lillian." Nathaniel nodded, his focus unwavering. "She's enjoyed her time with you so far, but we need to build trust." "I understand." His voice was steady, sincere. "I want to do this right. I can set aside time every week, Saturdays if that works, just for her. Maybe we explore the city together, museums, parks, a kids' theater show if she's interested." Serafina studied him carefully. Was this real? Would his enthusiasm hold once the novelty wore off? "She loves museums and music." Her tone remained measured. "But if you make a promise, you have to keep it. No disappearing, no excuses." Nathaniel met her gaze, his voice quiet but firm. "I won't. I refuse to make the same mistakes again." For a moment, they just looked at each other. Serafina saw it then, the regret he had carried for 5 long years. And suddenly, she needed to ask the question that had haunted her all this time. Why did you hate the idea of a child so much back then? Her voice was softer than she intended, laced with old wounds that had never fully healed. Nathaniel exhaled, his shoulders tightening. "My father was absent." His tone was raw, stripped of his usual polish. "He built an empire but never looked back. I hated the uncertainty of it, never knowing if I mattered beyond being an heir. I swore I'd never repeat that cycle." He let out a bitter laugh. "And yet, when you got pregnant, I panicked. I convinced myself I would become exactly like him, a man who threw money at a problem instead of being emotionally present." His knuckles whitened around his water glass, his voice thick with self-reproach. "Ironically, I became something even worse. I didn't just neglect you, I pushed you away." Silence stretched between them. Serafina felt tears prick her eyes, memories rushing back. Nights spent alone, terrified and abandoned, aching for even a fraction of this vulnerability from him. She steadied herself, holding on to the strength she had built in his absence. "Lillian deserves your best. she murmured. She hesitated, then added, "If you're serious about this, I'll let you be in her life. But the moment you falter—" She stopped herself, swallowing the lump in her throat. Nathaniel leaned forward, his voice hushed but resolute. "I won't." His expression was unreadable, but his meaning was clear. "If you doubt me, watch my actions. I'll show up." They spent the next hour discussing logistics, how visits would be structured, the slow introduction of Nathaniel into Lillian's world. Serafina insisted that, for now, he remained a family friend, until Lillian was comfortable. Nathaniel reluctantly agreed. Before they parted, he hesitated, then carefully broached another topic. "Would you consider letting me contribute financially?" His voice was cautious, careful not to push. "For Lillian's education, healthcare, anything she needs." Serafina tensed. Old anger stirred. He had cast her aside once, and now he wanted to fund the life he had once rejected. But then she thought of Lillian, of the opportunities she could have, the security she deserved. Pride warred with pragmatism. Finally, she inhaled deeply. "I'll think about it." And with that, she rose from the table, leaving Nathaniel seated in silence, his expression clouded with lingering guilt. As she stepped out onto the busy sidewalk, she realized something surprising. This conversation, this confrontation, it hadn't broken her. For the first time in years, she had faced the man who had shattered her world and walked away stronger. Now, only time would tell if his transformation was real or just another fleeting regret. The night of the Hannah Frost Foundation Gala arrived in a dazzling blur of anticipation. A red carpet stretched before the entrance of a lavish Manhattan hotel, welcoming the city's elite, business moguls, celebrities, and socialites, gathering for a night of philanthropy and art. Inside, strings of fairy lights twinkled overhead, casting a soft glow over the grand ballroom. Photographers snapped away, capturing every glittering guest who stepped into the world of wealth and prestige. And at the heart of it all stood Serafina Vall. Her emerald green gown flowed elegantly as she stood near her exhibit, her posture poised, her expression unreadable. Her paintings, the soul of her journey, the reflections of everything she had endured and rebuilt, commanded attention. The reclusive artist, the woman with a story people whispered about but never fully knew. This was her moment to shine. But it was also a silent showdown with the past. And as she scanned the glittering room, she knew, somewhere among the guests, Nathaniel was watching. Waiting, perhaps for a conversation that could finally unearth everything left unsaid. Or perhaps for the moment when she would finally let go of the past or embrace it. Either way, before the night was over, something would change. For both of them. For the first time in 5 years, Serafina and Nathaniel found themselves in the same public space. Not as a power couple, posing for the cameras. Not as husband and wife, standing side by side in orchestrated perfection. But as two people bound by a past that had fractured them and a secret that would forever connect them. Their daughter. Pauline had taken Lillian back to the hotel suite for the evening, knowing that the gala was no place for a 5-year-old. Still, as Serafina stood among the glittering elite, she found herself wishing her daughter could witness this moment. The night her mother stood on equal footing with the powerful men who had once defined her world. Christine Holden hurried toward her, beaming with excitement. "We have a full house," she whispered. "Your pieces are drawing incredible attention, and Mr. Hayes will be introducing you before your speech." A flicker of tension ran through Serafina. Nathaniel, publicly vouching for her artistry? The thought felt almost surreal. She inhaled deeply, steadying herself. She had earned this spotlight. Minutes later, Nathaniel took the stage. His midnight blue tuxedo was immaculate, his presence commanding. The crowd quieted instantly, a mark of his status. His speech was concise, polished, effortless. He praised the Hannah Frost Foundation for its mission, supporting women and children, giving them the resources to reclaim their lives. Then, he turned to the art segment, his voice shifting, deeper, edged with something almost personal. "Tonight we are privileged to present works from a remarkable artist." A pause. An artist whose pieces embody resilience and hope. His gaze flickered toward her, unreadable. "Miss Serafina Vale, please join us." Applause swelled around the room. As Serafina stepped forward, she felt his eyes on her, not with arrogance, not with expectation, but with something quieter. Something that almost resembled pride. For a fleeting second, she held his gaze. And there, beneath the layers of past betrayals, an unspoken apology lingered. But she didn't stop. She turned to the microphone, exhaling slowly, facing the moment she had once feared. Her speech was clear, measured, unwavering. She spoke about art as a journey, as a reflection of survival. She described how each brushstroke carried the weight of pain, loss, and renewal. How her work was not about dwelling in the past, but about refusing to let it define her. Though she never spoke of her own story directly, the subtext was unmistakable. The room hung on her every word. She ended with gratitude for the Foundation's mission, for the safe spaces created for women who had been abandoned, cast aside, left to rebuild on their own. A standing ovation followed. Cameras flashed. For a moment, Serafina stood in the spotlight, not as someone's former wife, not as a tragic story, but as an artist who had built something entirely her own. As she stepped down from the stage, Nathaniel extended a hand. She hesitated. Then, slowly, she placed her fingertips in his, letting him guide her off the platform. The crowd buzzed with admiration, but around them a hush settled, an unspoken awareness of what this moment truly meant. His voice was low, meant only for her. "Your speech was beautiful." She withdrew her hand gently. "Thank you," she said, her tone subdued. Then, after a pause, "You did well, too." The words were simple, polite, distant, and yet they acknowledged something neither of them could say out loud. The auction began, raising substantial donations for the foundation. Serafina's paintings sparked competitive bidding, culminating in record-breaking sales. Nathaniel was swept into conversations with investors, while Serafina navigated a sea of donors and admirers. Excitement buzzed around her, but beneath it all, a quiet tension remained. She had survived the night, but the past had not disappeared. It still stood there, watching, waiting, and she was no longer sure if she wanted to keep running from it. Later, when the crowd began to thin, Serafina found a moment of solitude on the terrace overlooking the vast Manhattan skyline. The city stretched before her, glittering, endless, the place that had once been her prison, now standing as proof of her resilience. A soft sound behind her. Nathaniel. He approached cautiously, a slight tension in his shoulders. "I wanted to say goodbye before I left." His voice was quiet, almost hesitant, a beat of silence. "And to ask, can I see Lillian tomorrow?" Serafina turned to him fully, searching his expression. He didn't demand. He didn't push. He asked. She thought of Lillian's bright smile after their first meeting, the way she had accepted him so easily. "Yes," Serafina said softly. "We'll take it step by step." Nathaniel's eyes shone with gratitude. "Thank you, Serafina." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the city filled the space between them. Two people who had once been husband and wife, now standing at the fragile edge of something new. They were no longer what they had been. But maybe, just maybe, they could become something else, something better. And in the background, the sound of applause continued, the world seeing them only as philanthropic allies. But they both knew the truth. This was only the beginning. To the world, they were just two individuals standing on the terrace, two former lovers navigating the polite aftermath of a high-profile charity gala. But they knew the truth. Beneath the polished conversations and careful distance, they shared something far more profound. A daughter. A bond that had been broken, abandoned, and yet somehow was finding its way back together. Life's harshest storms have a way of shaping us, breaking us down, only to rebuild us into something new. Serafina, once cast aside, had found her strength in motherhood and art. She had built a life on her own terms, far from Nathaniel's shadow. Nathaniel, once blinded by ambition, had come to understand that no empire, no wealth, no amount of success could ever replace the child he had turned away from. Their reunion in Manhattan, first through an unexpected collision at a gala, then through tentative visits with Lillian, was proof that even after deep betrayal, healing was possible. It wasn't about forgetting. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about choosing to move forward, even when the path was uncertain. And perhaps, if they continued down this road, step by careful step, they might just find their way to something neither of them had ever expected. Not what they had before, but something better, a second chance, a different tomorrow. If this journey moved you, if you felt Serafina's strength, Nathaniel's redemption, and the fragile beauty of their second chance, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more stories of resilience, heartbreak, and the triumph of love, reminding us all that even in the darkest moments, hope and new beginnings can emerge if we dare to face our past.